All right, we're going to get started again. We ended up with this screen last time. That was our last screen. So we're going to continue on. We're talking about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment. And remember, we were talking about three different philosophers that was a part of the Enlightenment. So we want to continue on with that discussion then today. I think this is the third one, yes. Denis Diderot. So here you see a painting of him. He was from a peasant background. His father was a craftsman. So he too will be trained by the Jesuits, as many of these people are, trained by the Jesuits. And from there, he will learn. But of course, he becomes quite opposed to the church. He attends the University of Paris. And typically, if you went to the University of Paris, you studied law or theology. But he didn't want to do either of those. So he became a freelance writer. So you know what that means? Yeah, he works for free. He writes for free. All right. Anyway. Now, perhaps some of you hope to become a freelance photographer. How about if you're going to do it, why not freelance travel photographer? You just travel around the world and take pictures. And then just keep traveling, taking pictures. You just put them on your Facebook or whatever, Instagram. I don't know. You know, one thing I've noticed about people on those, what I call the Facebook and the Gram, is that, you know, everything always looks pretty good on there. I never see anything, you know, like everybody's smiling, everybody's having plenty to eat, they're moving all around, everybody's happy. But then when I meet the people, they don't seem as happy. I was walking down the main drag over here, what do we call it? The Prado, El Prado, sorry. And I saw these two young ladies, and they were going to take a selfie. Now, if it's two people taking a selfie at the same time, I don't think it's a selfie anymore. It's got to be a two-y or a groupie. It's not a selfie, because only one of them's holding the camera. Anyway, we won't argue that point. But then I noticed they're there, and what noticed is they were just kind of turn, and all of a sudden this camera went up, and they went, or something like that. And then they took the picture, and as soon as they took the camera down, they were like, okay, see you later. And they walked away. I don't know what that means. I'm asking you. Anyway, you could be a freelance photographer and go around with your iPhone around the world. You can make iMovies. Well, he would study and read many things. So how does a guy like this live? Rich people give him money. They are his patrons. He is patronized. Now, what does he write? We should be getting used to this. One of his favorite topics is to attack the church. And by the church, of course, I mean the Roman Catholic Church. Because really at this time, and especially in France, I mean there are a few Protestants around, but it's the Roman Catholic Church that they're really going after. In fact, he will say that Christianity, he doesn't just limit it to Roman Catholicism, Christianity is the most absurd and the most atrocious in its dogma. Anybody know what dogma is? It's got nothing to do with my chihuahuas. Yes?
A dogma is the laws of humans, and doctrine is the laws of God.
Oh, this sounds like this comes from a class somewhere. Okay. I think I'll buy that. I mean, you know, a dogma, the church, though, has dogmas, even though they would say they come from God. But that's a very specific definition. I'm not saying I disagree. But you are right. Dogmas are teachings that have been sort of codified, have been listed of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. I think the church officials would say it's based upon church teachings. But, yeah. You got a hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
The Christian church also believes in everything that the Catholics believe, like the geocentric view and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's hard to distinguish, because really up until the time of the Reformation, there aren't many groups that were Christian groups in the West that weren't Roman Catholic. There were a few groups, mostly considered by the Roman Catholic Church to be heretical groups that were around. Yeah. But yes, I think it was the common accepted idea that the earth was in the center of the universe up until the time of Copernicus, because it was a very radical thing he came up with there. Well, anyway, that's good. Atrocious. In its dogma. Like I said, it has nothing to do with my chihuahua. Now, if you come to my house tomorrow night, you'll probably meet my chihuahuas. Who, by the way, speaking of selfies, they have their own Facebook page. It's Lulu. I've got a dog named Lulu and a dog named Daisy. I think it's Lulu that actually has the Facebook account. I sometimes see her at my laptop in the evenings for a little pause. She's small. She's a Chihuahua. Well, anyway, you'll probably meet her. She's the friendlier of the two. Daisy barks a lot, but then she'll probably hide because she'll be afraid of everybody. All right. And I like this little graphic here. This is just for me. Some of this stuff's just for me. But this is a guy hiding behind some papers, and he's got pencils coming at him. And they say the pen is mightier than the sword. Well, maybe sometimes. So, what we see with our good friend Diderot is that he will abandon not only Christianity, he will abandon deism. So kind of a model for us of what may happen. He goes from deist to atheist. Now, his most famous work, his magnum opus, is the Classified Dictionary of the Arts, Science, and Trades. Of course, he's got it there in French. For those of you who like the French, you can read it off the title page. Basically, this is a kind of encyclopedia. And he will spend a long time doing this. Why? Because it's 28 volumes. He just keeps writing. Now just think about an encyclopedia. Of course, today people don't use encyclopedias. They use the Wikipedia, which is not quite the same thing, but similar. Encyclopedias, I think our library probably still has a few, right, in print. You would have multi-volumes, and they would go alphabetically, right? A, B, C, D. And so in the A volume, let's say if A is one volume, you would start with probably aardvark, because it has two A's. And then you would go on to, I don't know, whatever, Azure or something, AZ something or other. And you would try to list everything in between that starts with an A. Now this is very much an Enlightenment idea, to think that you can categorize all of human knowledge in a set of volumes, and then we put it there alphabetically. You don't put it there topically. So, you know, aardvark is next. I don't know what comes after aardvark, but I mean, the next thing listed after aardvark has nothing to do with aardvark, right? Probably. But it's a categorization of information, of knowledge. Now, Diderot is going to write this all himself. He doesn't it's not like he asks other people to. I've written for several encyclopedias and dictionary things, articles. And normally they have a whole team of people writing entries, into that. And you do the research, you turn it in, they edit it, they print it. But he's doing it all himself. 28 volumes. And of course, he's a philosopher. So he is sure, not only hopeful, but I think he's confident, that if you would just read his work, then you would see what he wants you to see, and that's that you need to change the world, need to change your thinking, change what you're doing. That's going to make the world a better place, because the world will be more like what Diderot thinks it ought to be. Like I said, these guys do not suffer from low self-esteem. They think rather highly of themselves. Okay? Just ask them. Well, Diderot makes these comments on the Enlightenment. The whole idea of the Enlightenment is that there's a lot of rules that we follow. This also comes to the economy. And when it comes to the economy, some people believe that the economy also has these rules that you should follow. And if you follow the rules of the economy, then things are going to work out. But if you mess around with it, right, if you try to get in there and adjust it, limit it, you're going to change things maybe you don't even understand because you don't understand all the rules. So there's a real debate as to how this should function. The physiocrats, Francois Quesnay and the physiocrats, have this idea, Enlightenment thinking, that there are natural laws that should govern the economy, and that those who are in charge of the economy, which at this point, say in France, is the French government, the monarchy, ought to come to understand these natural laws and therefore use it. I mean, it'd be just like if you didn't understand the law of gravity and you were going to climb up a ladder on the side of a building. You had no concept of gravity. You might have some problems, right? Some problems you don't want to have. It's like I always say, Mr. Gravity can be your friend, but he can also be your worst nightmare if you don't understand him and respect him. You've got to respect the gravity. That's what I say. Well, now, what we're going to say then is there should be, they're going to say, these laws, and they come to the idea, at least this idea develops, that you should leave the economy alone. Don't mess around with it. Don't try to regulate it. Governments love to do that kind of thing, right? They're called tariffs, embargoes, trade limitations, or whatever kinds, So that's one way to try to control the economy. So, like right now, of course, that can have perhaps unexpected results. Right now, we have sort of trade wars. We're talking about trade wars. I don't know if you pay attention to the news. If you do, then I apologize. Because there's a lot of crazy stuff out there. But at any rate, one of the things is, of course, that China today has a huge amount of trade with the United States, and the United States has a trade deficit with China. What does that mean? We buy a lot more stuff from China than China buys from us. All right, so that means money from the United States is basically flowing to China. And very little of the Chinese money or American, any kind of money, is flowing back the other way. So if you subtract the two, just be like if you came in here every day and each of you gave me $10, which, by the way, I don't want to, if you guys want to do this, I mean, that's, of course, it's up to you completely. I'm going to start a GoFundMe page just for me. No, I'm not. Well, let's say if you did that, and then I said, well, for every dollar you gave me, I will give you $1 back. Now, you may not have to be a math wizard to figure out that I could do that, and I'm still going to make money, right? And this is what's happening basically with China. They are selling us a lot more. They're taking in a lot more U.S. currency than the U.S. is getting back in stuff that they buy from us. Anyway, so then governments say, okay, we got to stop that. How are we going to stop that? Well, we're going to stop that by raising the prices of everything that we buy from China. Or just saying you can't buy certain things from China. That's an embargo. If I say I'm going to raise the price sort of artificially by the government, that's a tariff. It's kind of like a tax on things coming in. These are meant to regulate things. The other thing I could say is then the stuff that you are selling, if you have a company, then I try to regulate who you sell it to or what price you sell it at. All those kinds of things. Basically, this approach, laissez-faire economics would say, you should leave it alone. Keep your hands off the economy. There are rules that are out there, natural laws, that will govern it. You already know what some of these are, right? Supply and demand, right? Supply and demand. And what does that mean? What is that rule, just briefly? What is the rule of supply and demand? Yeah. Well, maybe. I know one thing that will happen is the price will go up. Supply might go up because people start making a lot more because they can sell it. But the more that people want something, the more it's going to cost you. See? If I walked in here and I wanted to sell my 2/3 bottle of water, probably not going to get a lot of takers, right? I'm not going to get a high price on that. Unless you're really thirsty, you might say, well, I don't care. I'll give you $1 for that, or I'll give you 50 cents or whatever. But I'm not going to get a lot of takers on that. Well, I brought something else in everybody wanted, and I said I had a limited supply of it. You're going to try to buy it fast, and you're going to be willing to pay me more. I might say, well, how much are you going to give me? I'll give you $1. How much are you going to give me? I'll give you $2. I'll give you $3. I'll give you $5. So the idea here is that the price of something is not inherent in the object. The price of something is linked to people's desire to have it, to the demand for it, the need or desire for the product. Okay? And that also then relates to the law of diminishing returns. You ever heard of that one? This is not an economics class. But the law of diminishing returns means that if I'm selling you, let's say you really need a car to get around. The first car that you buy is very valuable to you because it's how you get to work, it's how you go to the store, it's how you do everything. The second car you buy is not as valuable to you because you already got one. But you might say, okay, maybe there's 2 of us in the house and this way we can both drive. The third car you buy will be even of less value. And the fourth, even less. Why? Because you don't need it. You can only drive one car at a time. Now, there are people that collect cars or something. But what I'm saying is it comes to the point where you don't need it anymore. Just like, let's say, with televisions or laptops. Your first laptop is very valuable to you if you have one. Your 5th laptop would not be as valuable. Because it gets hard to maintain, hard to figure it out. And say, I don't want to use 5 different laptops, because then all my files get messed up. And I got to figure out how to use each one of them. So what I'm saying is, if I'm selling laptops and you don't have one, it's going to be maybe easy for me to sell you one. But if you already have 2 or 3 laptops, you're not interested in buying. No matter how good a laptop I have here, you're probably not too interested in it. That's the law of diminishing returns. The more that you have of something, let's say, like televisions in your house. If you got a television in every room, you don't really need another television. But that's what they do is they say, well, this one's better than the one you have, right? That's what they try to say. I don't know. It's bigger. It's better. It's got weird stuff. I don't know. I haven't kept up on television since I bought a big television, and I'm going to use it till the big television doesn't work anymore. That's sort of my theory. That's the way I do it. They come out with like 9D television with 9 million pixels per square centimeter. I see mine fine the way it is right now. Something messes up, then I'm looking for a television. But for now, I can go to those stores. It'd be really hard for them to sell me a television. I've already got one. So these are the laws that they're talking about, and that we shouldn't try to mess with them, because if we mess with those laws, then we're going to mess everything up. If we put a tariff on things, a tax, if we try to limit things, put an embargo on things or whatever, it will have, can have, and usually will have unexpected results. So the idea here is that you should let the economy alone. Leave it alone. Keep your hands off of it. Laissez-faire. Now, if you really want to study this kind of thinking, then you need to get familiar with this guy right here. His name is Adam Smith. If you've never heard of Adam Smith, well, I guess you just have now. He is sort of the guy who codifies, who writes about this laissez-faire economics in a pretty hefty work called The Wealth of the Nations. I've got a copy. It's about that thick, right? A couple inches thick. He writes this in 1776. That's a date you can remember. That's when it's published. He's Scottish. You might call him a philosopher. You might call him an economist. Now, this is called laissez-faire economics. Some people will start to call it economic liberalism. Why? Because liberal really means that you want to be open about things and just allow things sort of to go, right? That's sort of the basic. You got to be very careful when people, I guess I'll just use this time just to say quickly, you got to be very careful with the terms liberal and conservative. They can mean very different things in different subjects, in different settings, right? In fact, Adam Smith used to be called an economic liberal, but if you hold to the principles of Adam Smith today, you would be called very much an economic super conservative if you held to his economic liberalism of the 18th century. Because his idea is that the government should not control the economy. And what's very popular in our thinking today is that the government ought to control the economy. Some want it to be controlled completely. Tell companies what to charge and what to make, how many to make, and so on. Okay? So, the economic liberal of today has very different ideas than the economic liberal of 1776. So that's why I'm just telling you, be careful with those terms. So Adam Smith had this idea, and he delineates it there. So what does Adam Smith say about the government, then, in his Wealth of the Nations? I think this is important because Adam Smith and his ideas of laissez-faire economics is what some people today would call capitalism. Capitalism is really a name that was ascribed to this free market enterprise by its critics, primarily by communists, people like Marx and others, call it capitalism. Because it takes capital, that is money, to get a business going. Okay? So, this then comes down to what do you think is the purpose of government? Again, I'm not asking that question right now. Maybe we'll ask it later. But what is the purpose of government? What should the government be in the business of doing? When I talk to some people today, it's pretty clear that they want the government involved in everything. From the time they're born, probably even before they're born, to the time they die, and probably even after they die, they want the government to be regulating and controlling lots of stuff in their lives and in other people's lives. Adam Smith would not have agreed. Adam Smith said that the government should really be doing three things. Three things. The first thing is protection. Protecting the citizens of that government. Okay? So we won't put any names on. Let's say it's just government A, country A with government. The government of country A should be protecting the citizens of country A. How are they going to protect it? Well, it could be from invasion. For example, here in the United States, a lot of people say they're worried about Mexico. I'm worried about Canada. Those Canadians, I don't trust them. I mean, we've got a long border with Canada, and we have almost no protection along here. And those Canadians just come across all the time. They're taking our jobs. They infiltrate. They just blend right in. And then somebody says, oh, they're Canadian? I didn't know they were Canadian. See? You got to watch them. Plus, here's another thing, just to get you thinking. Why do the Canadians make their money, their coins, the same size as ours, but lower value? They bring their money across, they put it in our vending machines, wrecking our economy. Now, down here in Florida, you get a lot of Canadians down here, so, I'm just telling you. Up where I lived much further north, we used to actually get a lot of Canadian pennies and change. Once you got a Canadian penny, guess what? You're lost. Somebody hands you a thing of change, you get later on, you pull it out, you go, wait a minute, that's a Canadian penny. Why do they make the Canadian penny the same color, the same size as our good old American pennies? Well, I know why. Because they're worth less. So then what would I have to do? I would roll the pennies into those 50 things. I would stick the Canadian pennies in the middle. I'd put the good old American ones on the outside. Then I would give it to the bank. Now it's the bank's problem. They got the Canadian pennies. I got my 50 cents. But eventually somebody's got to pay for that. And it's a good US of A economy. It's taking it on the chin. Plus, the Canadians, any Canadians in here? I don't want to offend any Canadians, but I guess I am. Canadians really don't have any culture. Have you ever heard, let me just ask you this, have you ever heard somebody say, hey, there's this great Canadian restaurant, we ought to go there and have lunch? You ever heard that? No, you're never going to hear that. Okay, the Canadians have Canadian bacon, which is just ham. All right, really. They have maple syrup, but we got that too. What else they got? Oh, they got that stuff they sell up at Disney, which I was very surprised, right? It starts with a P. What's it called? Poutine, which is like some kind of mush stuff. That's it. That's all the Canadians got. Bacon, maple syrup, and this poutine stuff that's kind of a mushy, it's sort of like fried grits or something. I don't know what it is. Anyway, what else they got? That's it. Great Canadian music. What? Drake. Oh, yeah. See, Drake is just a guy that came from Canada. He's making all the money down here. Anyway, it's just something to think about. So, we need to be protected because someday you're going to wake up and the Canadian flag is going to be flying all over this country. And everyone's going to be saying A. And this, what's it called? Poutine is all you're going to be able to go into a restaurant. They're not going to have any good American food in there anymore. No more hamburgers. No, we got fried poutine and Canadian bacon. You want that? Anyway. So protection. So how are we going to protect ourselves from the Canadians? We need a strong army so that they can't invade us. And if they do try to invade, we could stop them. So that's Adam Smith's first thing. Second thing is, again, protection, but this is sort of internal protection. Let's say there's a guy that wants to beat you up. Maybe for a good reason, or maybe not. Maybe the guy wants to steal your car or steal something from you, right? Break into your apartment and take your stuff. What are you going to do? You're probably going to call the police. You're going to call somebody, right? 911. Protection. So people should be protected so that they're safe from harm. Not by Canadians necessarily, but by people living here. So protection from each other. So protection from the outside, protection on the inside. Now notice he's only got them doing 3 things, and those are 2 of the 3 things. What's the third thing? The third thing is public works. Public works. Adam Smith did argue that the government probably ought to be doing some public works. What do I mean by that? Building roads, perhaps bridges. In his day, they were building canals. We don't build canals anymore. I mean, these were canals that move around goods. Because remember, he's in Scotland and England. They built a lot of canals. So that's sort of the equivalent of roads. Or train, like railroad kind of stuff, that sort of stuff. So regulating that kind of thing, making sure that we have roads and bridges, infrastructure that are called public works. And that's it. What does he not have? Anything else? Public health care? No. Adam Smith would say no. Welfare state? Adam Smith would say no. All the other things that maybe, I don't know what you think the government ought to do or not do, but all the other things that the government does, if it doesn't relate to those 3 things, they shouldn't be doing it. That's a very limited government. And so what does that mean? You're not going to be able to regulate the economy because there's no means to do it. You want to put a tariff on something? No. Now, you're going to be some taxes because you got the public works. And you're going to have a military, and you're going to have a police force. That's going to take money. So the government taxes to pay for those 3 things. All right? Something to think about. This is the limited idea. And so his real idea about the government was it was a passive policeman. Passive policeman. What does that mean? Not out looking for sort of watching, like looking over your shoulder to see what it is you're doing, Not reporting you because you're texting in class and scrolling around looking at Facebook. Stuff like that, not that kind of stuff. But if somebody comes up and whacks you in the head, then you call for help and he comes. See, that kind of policeman. So not an investigative kind of thing, but all right. Probably spent too much time on that, but that's the idea. I think it's important to know, though, because that's a debate that still goes on today and will be going on for a long time. Now, here's another person of the Enlightenment thinking. His name is John Locke. Locke with an E. Maybe you've heard of him. John Locke, again from England, a philosopher, he writes an essay concerning human understanding. An essay concerning human understanding, 1690. What does John Locke say? Well, he says something that's actually pretty controversial to some people. Probably not that controversial to you today, but it was to some people of his time. He's going to say that when a person is born, a little baby, hopefully they're little babies when they're born, because if they're like full-grown adults, then somebody's going to be in a lot of trouble. Anyway, so when the small child is born, that the child has a blank slate, he's going to call it. A tabula rasa. That's Latin for a shaved tablet. That comes from the Latin the Romans used to hand out to their students, a piece of wood, a little tablet, about the size of an iPad, right? And then on it, they would put wax. And then you would take a stylus, kind of like a pen or a pencil, and you would scratch into the wax to practice your writing. Okay? So it's sort of like a little tablet that you could practice your writing. And then when you got done that and you're going to start your next lesson or whatever, you had to shave it. You had to smooth out the wax so that you could write stuff on there again. Okay? So it's a practice tablet. So what he's saying is that when the person is born, their minds, their person, their everything is blank. There's nothing written on it. It's kind of like this whiteboard up here. Well, I guess it's got a little bit up there in the corner. But there's nothing written on it. So how does stuff get written on it? On your mind and your values, your personality. Where does that come from? It gets written on there from what you experience, from what your teachers teach you, from what your parents talk about and show you and do, and your teachers and your family and all that sort of thing, and your friends. Those things get written on your, let's say, whiteboard in this case. And that's what forms your basis of thing. Now this goes contrary to a very popular belief at the time that people were born with original sin. So that's really what got John Locke in trouble with some people. They held to a kind of original sin, that people were born already sinful, that they had stuff already written there, that they inherited from their parents evidently, right? And so he says no. He says what you are the experiences that you have. So they have a kind of term for that, right? Nature versus nurture. Does that make sense? Nature versus nurture. Well, John Locke would say it's all nurture. It's all nurture. All of our knowledge, therefore, is learned. Now, it's important to his thinking, and I think it was important for us to understand that kind of enlightenment thinking is out there and very popular. That knowledge is learned. Well, John Locke will write other things, have other ideas about the government and so forth. But I think this idea is there at the base of it. That's why I mentioned it first. Well, we read it in our own Constitution, but I think I quoted last time, and people weren't quite sure what it was. But we hold these truths to be self-evident. Right? That all men are created equal and are bestowed by their Creator certain inalienable rights. Inalienable rights means you cannot remove it from them. You cannot separate it from them. Life, liberty, and ours says pursuit of happiness. Now, this is pretty much John Locke's, there's lifting this right out of John Locke. If we had turned it in on the Constitution, a lot of stuff would be going back to John Locke. It'd be interesting to do that. Well, anyway. Well, he writes a thing called Two Treatises of Government. Here's where he says, all people are born equal and free. Again, this is a pretty radical thought, because not only do people hold to this kind of original sin, but people also held to very strict view of social status. If you were born to a certain family, then you had certain privileges because you were from that family. And if you were born not from that, if you're nobility, you have this kind of thing. If you're not nobility, you have this. Right? If you're, what's his name? Prince Harry, right? You grow up in a palace. And you have all kinds of money. And you marry movie stars. If you're not Prince Harry, you don't have that. Why? Well, he was born privileged. He's born royal. You're not born royal. You don't like it? Well, tough. That's just the way it is. Now, that's the way things were then. And they still kind of are now, in certain ways. But, and that is that you had social stratification. So that people really were not born equally. Right? Some people had privileges other people didn't have. John Locke's going to say, no, really people are born equal. And they're born free. Why? Because their uncle's a doctor. No, just kidding. That was kind of a joke. But you didn't get it, so don't. Here's another thing. A lot of the jokes are just for me. If you want to come along, that's fine. I'm probably going to go ahead and say them anyway, even if I don't think they're going to work. Like that one. I didn't think it would work. Well, people have then inalienable rights. That's coming from the natural rights, the natural laws that they have. And remember, in our Constitution, it's life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. Hey, can I get you to put your phone away, please? Yeah, thanks. Life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. He's going to say life, liberty, and property. There was the idea, of course, most of us, I would say most of you in the room, hold pretty firmly that you can have property. If I came up and took your phone or your laptop or your backpack or something and I just walked away with it, you say, hey, wait a minute, that's my stuff. That's my property. You have your stuff and I have my stuff. And I have a right to have my stuff. And I have a right for you not to take it from me. See, that's pretty much ingrained in us pretty early on. We have to teach people to try to share. Doesn't go so well, right, sometimes. Well, this is property. Now, some people would say that certain people don't have any rights to property. John Locke said everybody did. Okay? Now here is the kicker. John Locke's going to say that the government is actually formed by people in order to protect their rights. What? Yes. He's saying, somebody might try to take your life. They might try to kill you or whatever. Or they might try to take your freedom. They might try to lock you up. They might try to take your property. But that's why we have the government. The government then is going to protect you if somebody tries to come and hurt you, kill you, steal from you or whatever, lock you up, imprison you, kidnap you. The government will come to help you to make sure that doesn't happen, and then will punish the person who does it. Right? So what does that mean, though? The real important point here is John Locke is saying that the people form the government. Not that the government is just there and you are under its control. The government is there because we want it to be there. The government is there because it's supposed to do what we want it to do. Now, maybe you've heard about this somewhere in another document. The government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's coming right out of John Locke's ideas. And also coming right out of the American Revolution is the idea that if the government is not doing its job, you get rid of it and you start another one. That the people have the power to rid themselves of a government that's not doing what it should do and to form a brand new one. This is radical thinking. You post that stuff on Facebook, it'll all be blocked. Right? Isn't that what they do now? It gets reported that you're a radical, you're a revolutionary, or whatever, and then it'll be censored out. All right, well, whatever, I don't know. Anyway, this is radical thought. That's how the United States got started. Now, if you started talking like that today, even though that's the way we got started, some people would be very uncomfortable if you said you were going to overthrow the government today because it's not doing its job, and you're going to start a new one. So, if the government fails, John Locke says, well, then the people just create a new government. No big deal. The government needs to protect the people. So, we sort of have the idea, I know a lot of people have the idea, that you should be in fear of the government, that you have to do what the government wants you to do, and all that kind of thing. It was not John Locke's thinking. John Locke would say, no, the government should be doing things for you. And if the government's not doing the right job, you get rid of it and you get a new government. The government works for the people, not the people for the government. Now I'm really getting radical. Well, anyway, that's John Locke. And a lot of those ideas are there in our Constitution and in the beginning of the American Revolution and the forming of the American government. Well, here's another guy name is Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Coming out of the same sort of time period, he has a little different ideas, though. Again, he's talking about government. He is a self-taught son of a watchmaker. Self-taught. Trained himself. You know, really, I probably shouldn't say this because this is being recorded. What you learn at a university, you could really teach yourself. Right? If you were highly motivated. You can learn about Western Civ without ever taking a Western Civ class. You can learn about mathematics without ever taking a math class. You would just have to be determined, very determined to do it. Especially today, there's so much access on the internet, online. There's all kinds of things out there that you could do. Now, you're not going to get a degree, but you could get the knowledge. Well, anyway. So, this is what he did. He trained himself. He was a smart guy, trained himself. He had some different ideas, maybe that you wouldn't agree with. John Locke may be more to your liking than Rousseau. My guess is maybe that is true. But he writes things down, Discourse on the Origins of the Inequality of Mankind. Rousseau takes a different angle. He's saying that the government is not representing, I guess if we want to put it this way, all the people. The government's only representing some of the people. And that the government then creates the laws, and that the laws then reinforce what, say, the wealthiest people want, not what the poorest people want. So this is a different approach. Laws and government, he says, are really established so that private property, he wasn't for private property. John Locke was saying you had a right to your private property. Rousseau is saying, no, really, there shouldn't be any private property. What does that mean? Well, if I want to come over and start typing on your computer, it's not really your computer. It's our computer, all of us. If I want to drive your car to the store, it's not really your car, is it? You should just leave the keys in it out there in our non-existent parking spots, and then we'll just drive it there. What's more valuable on this campus is not your car, but that parking spot. I assume people don't even drive their car many times because they don't want to have to find another parking spot. I don't know for sure. That's my suspicion. That you say, no, I'm not driving you drive your car. I'm not going to drive my car because I'm not giving up my parking spot. That's my parking spot because I'm in that spot, and if I leave, I don't have it anymore. That's why I always carry orange cones with me that say SEU on it.
I tried it and it never works. I always put it on the parking spot. Someone moves it away every time.
This is confession time now. Well, anyway, we better move on because somebody might listen to this. Everything's wonderful. We have all kinds of parking. As I heard one person say, we don't have a parking problem, we have a walking problem. That was somebody that has a very nice parking spot, I think. Anyway. Well, he also comes up with the social contract in 1762. Society agrees to be governed, he says, so a little bit like Locke and Nat, but here's where it goes different. The government rules by the general will of the people. But, according to Rousseau, the general will of the people, you might think that, well, what do we got? I don't know, 40, 50 people in here. We'd say, okay, what do you guys want to do? And 40 of you say, I want to do this, and 4 of you say, I want to do that. So we'll say, okay, the general will of the people is to do the first thing. 40 out of 50 want to do it, so we're going to do that. That's 80%. That's not what Rousseau means by the general will of the people. You got to watch a lot of things in a lot of these discussions. You got to be very careful how words are defined. Sometimes they're not defined the way you might define them. So, the general will then is the highest aspirations of the highest, really it's what the people ought to want. If I had to reword it. So let's say, for example, we're going to decide what to eat for lunch, and you're going to have a cheeseburger and fries over at our lovely cafeteria. I mean, it's not a not a cafeteria. What's it called? They call it Chartwell's, but again, there's no sign that says Chartwell's. What's it called? What's it say out there? Toscana. Okay, well, whatever. We're over in that place where they have the food, and you decide, I'm going to have a double patty cheeseburger with 2 slices of cheese. See, I haven't had lunch yet, so this is sounding pretty good. And fries. And I'm going to get like a big slice of cake and maybe some Coke or something, and I don't know, something else. That's what you want. But should that be your highest aspiration? Somebody might tell you, no, you should be eating broccoli and lettuce and, I don't know, green beans. Now, you could go to our cafeteria probably any day and you could get lots of that kind of stuff. You could get a plate of salad or vegetables. And no dressing, of course. You don't want that. Just eat the vegetables. No bread. That should be your highest aspiration. So what would that mean then? If the government sets what your highest aspiration should be, it may not be what you think it ought to be. But that doesn't matter to Rousseau. The highest aspiration. And you are free to follow the highest aspiration. Your idea of freedom is, I can go get that double cheeseburger that I really want. That's not Rousseau's idea. Rousseau's idea is, no, you're going to be forced to follow what's best for you, and you're going to have that broccoli and green beans with no butter or sauces or dressings. Because that's what the highest aspiration is. So in other words, he redefines things so that freedom seems to me like it's not freedom. And general will is certainly not necessarily my will. And that's the way he does it. So freedom is forcing people to follow what's best for them. And of course, someone else has decided. I might think that double cheeseburger is the best thing for me. Well, we kind of have some of this, right? Like in New York, I don't know if they still had it. They had a law that you couldn't buy a 32-ounce soft drink or slushy or something at 7-Eleven. If you went in there, they banned it. It was banned. You couldn't get a 32-ounce cup of anything. Soft drink. Too much sugar. That's too much sugar for anybody. You can't have it. So what did they say? They passed a law. It's illegal to sell 32-ounce drink. I guess you could buy 2 16-ounce drinks and drink them, but you can't buy it in one, at a cheaper price. Or they say, where was I? And they would not give you a bag. This is a new thing now. You're going to start going to stores and nobody's going to give you a bag to put anything in because bags are bad. So you're going to have to haul your own bags with you, I guess, even though they're bad. I guess their cloth ones are okay. Stuff like that. So in other words, we pass laws to regulate people's behaviors because we say it's what's best. But it may not be what the people really want. We force people to do what we think they ought to do because we think we know what they ought to do. The government knows better than we do. This is a common idea and a common practice. Well, let's see. Well, why not? Let's talk a little bit about music. I know you like the music. So, there's interesting music. Usually I pass over this, but I'll go ahead and talk about it because there's interesting music in the 18th century. What we often call classical music, we sometimes just label it. If you say, what are you listening to? You say, oh, I'm listening to Drake. No, I'm listening to Cardi B. she's got a new diss track about Drake. Something like that. I don't know. Anyway, it's really lit. That's my only attempt at that. I'll stop now. But anyway, yeah, if somebody says, "Well, I'm listening to classical music," that probably encompasses areas that would be larger than what a music historian would call classical music. So we're not going to get into all those details here. But I do want to mention some of this 18th century music. Somebody like Bach. J.S. Bach, or Johann Sebastian Bach. Now, there's a long line of Bachs out there, right? So that's why we have to identify, because it was him, there was his sons, and I think his brothers, his nephews, I don't know how many of the Bachs are out there doing stuff. There's probably at least 8 of them, 7 or 8 of them, maybe more. But he's the most famous. He's the first one. He was a music director at a church. This is really where most music gets started, because how are you going to get paid to do music at this time? Well, you get paid by working at a church. You play an organ. You write music for the church. Special music for Christmas or something like that, and you sort of earn your keep that way. Well, that's what he did. He was a music director at the church in Leipzig, and he would always write his music in honor of God. He would put it right on all of his music. This is to God. And he has a very kind of, I won't say mechanical, but he is very precise, very mathematical approach. He has a lot of that kind of stuff going on. And so if you start listening to it or trying to sing it or play it, you'll find out what I'm talking about. It can be pretty challenging. Then there's a guy named Handel, George Friedrich Handel. Again, from about the same period. He started off writing what we might call secular music, operas, that sort of thing, in Italy. But he will eventually move to England, and this is really where his work is most famous. He does in England. And he's best known for his religious music, especially oratorios, as they're called. Right? And you must know, at least, Handel's Messiah, right? We played some of it. I'm sure you've heard it. It's his most famous work. What's that? I don't have it. I don't have it set up to play. There you go. She just played it. And he will play forever. It's a very long work. We can't play the whole thing. I mean, actually, that's just the Hallelujah chorus, which is one part of Handel's Messiah. But it goes through the life of the Messiah. It tells the story of Jesus, basically, in musical form. So he's playing Baroque music, he and Bach, this style of music. It's kind of mathematic, rhythmic. The oratorio of the Messiah, and he has others. We'll just mention a couple things here. Who's next? I think it must be our buddy Haydn. And symphonies. This is really when symphonies get their start. Now again, think about this as Enlightenment kind of music. The music is mathematical. The music has a lot of form. The music has a lot of rules. The way it begins, the way it ends, the way the pitch of it goes, right? It's not, it's not a random thing. It's very precise. It goes along with Enlightenment thinking. There's rules for everything. There's rules for music. And how music should be written, how music should be played. Haydn wrote many symphonies. Symphonies become then really develop at this time, where you get a lot of instruments. They get bigger and bigger, and they play a lot of stringed instruments, a lot of woodwinds, and so forth. And they play this kind of music that is, again, I don't want to say it's mechanical. It has a lot of emotion, but it has a lot of rules. It has a system to it. And then here's the guy. Here's the guy that becomes, if you want to know who was the first sort of superstar of music. You know, most of these people who become, they're now famous to us now, they were not that famous while they were alive. But Mozart became famous while he was alive. He was a child prodigy. He was playing concerts for rulers and kings and dukes and stuff when he was 6 years old. Okay, so I mean, he could play, he could write, he could compose as a child. He wrote his first opera when he was 12, just to give you an idea. And he's born in the town of Salzburg, Austria. So if you go to Salzburg, if you ever go there to visit, there will be a lot of Mozart stuff there, including Mozart candy, which is not candy made out of Mozart, but sometimes maybe in the shape of Mozart. And usually it's just in a box that says Mozart candy, and a lot of tourists buy it. It's pretty good. It's chocolate, mostly. Okay. And he moves to Vienna, because that's sort of the town to be in. And he begins to write many symphonies, and he writes many operas. Some of his most famous ones, The Marriage of Figaro, The Magic Flute. So, again, I'm just introducing you to a few concepts here. But he was extremely gifted in this, and the music just seemed to flow out of him, right? He would write it, and then it would be played. However, even though he had great fame while he was alive, he died impoverished. He didn't really make much money from this, even though he was kind of famous. And he dies a pauper. And you can't go to his grave because nobody knows where he was buried. He was buried in like it was the whole group of people. It was like in a pauper's grave. Just put all these people there and there together. Didn't have any money. So it's kind of a, it's an interesting story, and somewhat parts of it are sad, but certainly a musical genius, most people would say, Mozart. Now let's talk a little bit about religion then, the developments of religion that come in this same enlightenment or reacting to the Enlightenment thinking. Remember, we've talked about the rise of skepticism. Hey, did that sign-in sheet make it around? Where's it at? Did everybody sign it? Why don't you pass it on, kind of pass it across and pass it up front here. Just want to make sure everybody signs it. Sometimes it takes weird paths. Okay, thanks. I'll have to update this. Well, remember, we're talking about the skepticism that's growing out of the scientific revolution and enlightenment, and the philosophes, they're attacking the church and religion. Some of them even Christianity completely, not just the Roman Catholic Church. So there's a lot of skepticism out there. People turning to deism. Some people even becoming atheists or agnostics. But that doesn't mean that religion was gone. In fact, as a kind of reaction to this skepticism, there was a growing movement of devotion. Devotional kind of thought grew. There are several devotion or devotional Christian movements that take place in the same Enlightenment period, where basically they begin You know, that what's being said in enlightenment is everything's very mechanical. That even the human is mechanical, you know, and that the whole world is mechanical. Everything is just a machine and mechanical. And there's a kind of reaction to that to say, no, not everything can be explained that it's a machine. There are emotions. There is religion. There is devotion. There is a spiritual side. All right? You know, I don't know how much you've had to deal with people yet, but you will have to. One thing you'll find out is a lot of times people are not very rational. They don't always do stuff that makes sense. Right? That's what I mean. They do stuff that doesn't make any sense. You know, often I've had students come up to me and they'll tell me, hey, Dr. Wineland, I'm dropping out of college and I'm moving to Hoboken, New Jersey. And I'm like, what? Hoboken? And you know what my response usually is? If it's a guy, I say, what's her name? If it's a young lady, I say, what's his name? Because what I found is people do crazy stuff. If they're really doing crazy stuff that doesn't make any sense, that may well be the reason. Usually I'm right. So why would you want to move to Hoboken, New Jersey? You're not from New Jersey. Well, there's this girl I met. She lives in Hoboken. Right? Well, anyway. So what I'm saying is people are not always rational. They're very emotional. And this means religious. Now, one of these, largest or becomes most influential of these devotional movements of this period comes to be known as Methodism. Methodism is really started by two Wesley brothers. John Wesley is sort of the theologian, if you will, the preacher, and then his brother Charles Wesley is the guy who writes all the music. He writes a lot. He writes a lot of the most famous hymns that were used for hundreds of years. They were written by Charles. He was writing, I tried to figure it out one time. I figured he must have been writing about 5 songs a week for 30 or 40 years that they would then use. Well, anyway, he wrote thousands of hymns. Well, John Wesley was an Anglican. You know what an Anglican is? The Anglican Church? You sometimes call it the Church of England. Church of England or the Anglican Church. Here in the United States, it has taken the name the Episcopal Church. Why? Calling yourself the Church of England during the American Revolution was not very popular. Or the Anglican Church. So they changed it to the Episcopal Church. It's still basically connected to the same group, but it has a different name. So anyway, this is we don't have time to go into the history of that church, but it formed as a Protestant movement basically because of Henry VIII, who basically wanted to marry a different woman. He was already married, and the Pope wouldn't grant him an annulment. And so he said, you know what? I'm going to start my own church, and I'm going to grant myself an annulment. And then he married the other woman. So again, what's her name? See? Well, you're doing something crazy like starting your own church. What's her name? I believe that one was Anne Boleyn. Well, you can talk about her. Anyway, so they started a church. So it is Protestant. That is, it's not Roman Catholic. But then there's a lot of flexibility in there, and there's been a lot of debate as to how sort of Roman Catholic in theology they should be. Well, John Wesley is a member of this. He was a minister of this. His father had been a minister in this. And we see then that the spiritual devotion that he will do. Actually, it's very interesting to study the life of John Wesley. John Wesley comes to the United States as a chaplain in Georgia when it was a penal colony. Right? He sent prisoners to Georgia. He was sent there to be a kind of a chaplain to that colony. And on his way back, after serving his time, I think it was a year or two doing that, he was sailing back to England, and they were sailing across the Atlantic, and they came across a giant storm that hit. Is it raining out there? A giant storm hit, and the boat was being tossed about, and John Wesley was very worried. He was nervous. He's afraid. And these guys came over to him, and they said to him, "Sir, are you a Christian?" And John Wesley said, "Well, yeah, I'm a Christian. I'm an Anglican minister." They said, "Well, why are you afraid?" "Well, because of the storm." He goes, "Don't you believe God is in charge?" And these guys were Moravians. I don't know if you ever heard of Moravians. But Moravians lived in Germany. That's a whole other story. But the Moravians started talking to John Wesley, and John Wesley came to visit the Moravians, and he saw the way they were doing their devotional kind of things, and their sort of private study, or they have these group studies, what we would call, right? And so he started doing that. He remained an Anglican minister, but he began to preach out in the streets to the people, because one of the things he noticed is that many of these people that he saw outside would not come into the church. They didn't feel comfortable there. They didn't have the right kind of clothes. They didn't feel like they were welcome there. So John Wesley went out into the street and began to preach. Because in England they had a thing called the idea that you could preach in the public square. You could stand up kind of on a soapbox. They'd have a little spot, and that's where you could say whatever you wanted. So he went there and he began to preach to the people. And then when the people came, then he invited them to come to studies where they had a method of studying the Bible. And so they got nicknamed the Methodists because of their method of studying the Bible. John Wesley never left the Anglican Church, but the Methodist Church, this whole system begins to form. And of course, after his death, the whole church, the Methodist Church, begins. But it starts as a pietist movement, a devotional movement that is really growing out of this whole idea of the Enlightenment, where everything's very rational and mechanical, and this is basically the kind of reaction against that, to say no, we have to also be personal and spiritual. And his brother Charles was involved. Like I said, he wrote over 7,000 hymns in his lifetime, many of which even you would know, even though you probably don't sing any hymns, right? Nobody in here probably sings hymns much anymore. Most churches don't sing them anymore. I think it's a loss because some of them are great songs, and he wrote some great songs. So look it up. You'll find some Christmas songs and other songs that he wrote that you would still know today. So let me remind you again that you have everything due Sunday night, right? Sunday night by 11:55 p.m. Be sure you load it up there to MyFire. All right, take care.